This morning, what I want to do is I would like to, firstly, just do a quick blessing in Hebrew, because today I'm going to be teaching directly from Torah, with particular reference to the portion or the parsha that is finishing today in most places where it's still Saturday. But today is the start of a new portion, of course. But let me just do the blessing first before we get started. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam let me start again. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. So today I wanted to finish off something about this here. Remember I was talking, for those who weren't here, just a quick refresher, the goal, what's the goal? To know Him more. And how do we get to know Him more? The dot, this dot, that letter. A certain walk, a certain dance. Yes. So the way we get to know Him more is by allowing Him to teach us who He is. Okay? We don't want our perspective, we want His perspective. And by getting His perspective, our first place of entry is in His Word. That's our first place of entry. That is the beginning of our conversation. And as I taught, and what I taught over the last few days, is that God confronts our intellect with the unknown. So if you're always looking for something that you know, something that is familiar, you're always going to stay in exactly the same place. And we see that Christianity is rife with groups of people that only want the familiar. You know, it seems to be the thing of many religions. We just want what's familiar to us. And that is why, something that I learned about idolatry. Why is idolatry so powerful in capturing our hearts and capturing our desire and capturing our affection? Because let's admit it, idolatry is people place their whole being in honor of idols and idolatry. But why is idolatry so powerful? Because it's taking the divine and trying to make it familiar. Okay, so we craft things and we use things that I can identify that, therefore I can identify with it, therefore I can have a conversation with it that is familiar to me. But we need to challenge ourselves. We need to be challenged with the reality of God, the truth of who God is. And that is that God is above. That's why the word says in Proverbs, His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And that is the reality, the overwhelming reality of our situation. Is that we are confronted with a God that is vastly unfamiliar to us. Until we allow Him to confront us with that reality and bring us to the place where we can realize that He wants to guide us into relationship. He wants to guide us into intimacy. So the Word is the beginning point. It's our frame of reference. And with the Word, He builds a platform for us to expand. So that if the goal is to know Him more, then the purpose of interacting with Him is so that we can perceive more of Him. And to be able to perceive more of Him, we have to be continually confronting the unknown of Him. And in doing that, our conversation starts the wrestling of it so that we can outwork our engagement with Him, which changes us. But the purpose of being changed is not so that we can escape creation. The purpose of knowing God is not so that we can escape creation and just hang out in eternity. the goal here is to know his desire, and to know his desire for this, to know his desire for us, so that we can co-labor with him on two fronts. So the first issue of co-laboring with him is so that we can be changed to be like him. And the way we co-labor is we learn about his desire so we can agree with it. And when we agree with something, that something starts to have an impact on our life and change us. Make sense? And then the other side of that is when we start to become to a place of maturity in the understanding of who he is. In other words, we start to have his perspective. We start to understand his desire. It becomes a living knowledge in us. Therefore, we start to have an impact on creation around us. That is the process of discipleship and maturity that we have in him. Because he desires to see all of creation. So if this circle here is all of creation, somewhere in here there's a universe. Maybe here, maybe another universe over there. We're not too sure. Some of us are, some of us aren't. But the idea and the goal is that we would be able to co-labor with him to see this completed. To see creation completed. So that when we've done this, then we can start to work on this. And this is completely different from that. And what I want to talk about today is why we are so important in here. And how our fellowship with God, by allowing him to take us into his house, so his house is both inside of creation and outside of creation. So when we come into his house, we come into a place that allows us to gather and learn from every resource that is made available to us to mature us in his ways. And then we bring that experience and that living knowledge back into this, so that this can be changed. Now that can happen in a number of ways. You can change your family life through your engagement with God. You can change your workplace through your engagement with God. You might one day be confronted with the beginning of the reality of what peace means, like what happens with me. And because I wrestled with it, and I chased after it, and I asked for his perspective, it changed me. And because of the change in me, it became a living fountain of his reality in me, pouring into creation around me. Therefore, wherever I go, the effect of that change, that living change, changes the environment around me. So I would practice in the place where I used to work while I was going through this, to watch and see and learn how his peace interacts with creation when it's allowed to flow through a humble vessel. Because it's not what I know, it's not what I think, it's his perspective that I want. So here's the challenge to us, and here's my encouragement to you. Right now, whatever is confronting you about the reality of who God is, allow it to change you and ask him for his perspective. And be prepared to have your intelligence, your intellect, overridden by a higher reality. Does that make sense? So this morning, I want to talk about a very interesting and a very famous servant of God. And his name is Ovadyah. Ovadyah. So you will know that as Obadiah. Okay, but his name is pronounced properly Ovadyah. And I'll write it up for you in a minute in here. And he's a very, very interesting person. And the reason I want to talk about him, and the reason I mentioned the Parsha, is because so in Hebrew culture, so in Judaism, Jewish people, especially observant Jewish people, so an observant Jewish person is someone who observes Torah. Okay? So what they do is every day, and this includes me, we read a portion of Torah. So remember, Torah are the first 5 books of Moses, or the 5 books of law. which is, so the first 5 books of your Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. I don't know why they call it Numbers, but they do. And Deuteronomy. All, Latin names. But if you know their Hebrew names, then things start to get a bit more expanded. So instead of Genesis, Bereshit. Instead of Exodus, Shemot. Instead of Leviticus, it's Vayikra. Instead of Numbers, it's Bamidbar. And instead of Deuteronomy, it's Devarim. In each one of those, so Bereshit, in the beginning, is the first word of Torah. Exodus is Shemot, which means names. So Exodus is all about the family or the children, the seed of Yaakov that came into Egypt to be exposed to the hand of God, and the deliverance and the fellowship of covenant that was about to be released into creation because of his covenant with them, which was the beginning of the revealing of the truth of his promise, which affected all of creation. And we're right now in Pesach, Passover. So Passover started yesterday. Passover goes for 7 days. If you're in Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, if you're in Israel, you celebrate the festival of Passover, or Pesach, for 7 days. It's not just a nighttime party. 7 days. If you're in the diaspora or in the exile, so you're not living in Israel, you celebrate 8 days. An extra day is added. And do you know why? Because that 8th day celebrates Messiah. It's the celebration of Moshiach. Because when Moshiach comes, what's going to happen? Every exile will be regathered again to the kingdom of Israel under the kingship of the Davidic kingdom, and we will experience global peace. And it says of this time that no man will teach his neighbor of God, because all men will know him. The knowledge of God will cover the earth as the seas, or will cover the earth as the waters cover the earth. However it goes. Something like that. But you get the picture. Isn't that? And so that is why Pesach is so... see, Passover is a eternal thing. God said, this is for your all generations. All generations. So if someone is to say that Passover is an old covenant thing, you're very much mistaken. It's not an old covenant thing. Do you know what's really interesting? Is that when Moshiach appears again, that the wonders of that day will surpass the wonders of the Exodus. And I don't know if you've read the Exodus of late, the 10 plagues, but they were pretty, for those that witnessed that, I think would be incredibly impactful. You know what I mean? Yes, I was talking about. How did I get onto the subject? That's right, we're talking about, so anyway, the Torah portion that we've just finished reading is called Shmini. Shmini. Shmini means eighth. So the profound thing about what we've just read in Vayikra and Leviticus is the inauguration of the high priest on the 8th day. So the number 8 to us is very important, because the number 8 always speaks about that which is beyond nature. And here's the most amazing thing about Pesach that most of us don't know. Pesach is the festival of skipping over the natural and into the fire of Hashem. So Passover was the beginning of the process of a liberation of a people coming out and over the natural into a supernatural covenant that was to be revealed and exposed to all of creation at Sinai 50 days later. Yeah. That's where we have what they call the Pentecost. So I forget some of these words now. But it's Shavuot. Shavuot is the revealing of Torah on Sinai. Happened 50 days later. Yeah? So you have your 7 days of Pesach, then you will count 49 days, and on the 50th day is Shavuot. That's one big party. But it must always happen in the spring. It must always happen in the spring. All right, so Shmini is all about the inauguration of the high priest. In it, we also learn of the deaths of his two sons, because what did they do? They brought alien. It says they brought alien incense before the Lord, before the Ark of the Covenant, and fire came forth. Fire came out of the incense and consumed them. We're not going to talk too much about that, but if I would encourage you to have a look at what actually happened there and do some research. Okay, so why is it that Obadiah, or Ovadyah, how does Ovadyah relate to this Parsha? Here's an interesting thing. So the Masoretes, what they do is to help at the end of every portion, which is read, so after 7 portions which read every day, they have what they call a mnemonic, which helps you remember what that portion is about. What is the significance of this portion? What is the significance of 8? What is the significance of being a servant? Because the high priest is a servant. He is a mediator between heaven and earth. Okay, makes sense? Whenever someone is a priest, so he talks about a whole nation of priests. Why? Because he wants a people that are engaging him, and they're engaging him realizing that his desire is for this. His desire is not just for us individually to be transcendent. His desire is for all this to be complete. So we're going to talk about the role of that. So why is the servant so important? Why is the number 8 important? How does that relate to someone called Ovadyah, who is known as a prophet, the prophet Obadiah, which is the only book of a prophet that has one chapter, just one chapter. And that one chapter is talking about the end of times. Let me rephrase that. I'm not talking about the end of times. He's talking about the revealing of Messiah, Moshiach, and the redemption of a nation that was dead set on destroying Israel. So in other words, redeeming creation. Redeeming something that doesn't look redeemable. So what the Masoretes did at the end of every portion is they had this mnemonic. The mnemonic for this portion, Shmini, is the name of Obadiah, because there are 91 verses in the portion of Shmini. Shmini means 8, but there are 91 verses. And so they relate it back to his name to teach us something very important about what it means to be a servant. So here's the name, Ovadyah. So let's do some, for those who have been learning, let's do some syllable division, because whenever you get a chance to practice this, because we want to learn how to say the words properly, don't we? And this is what one of my big goals here was to teach you how to do this, so that when you start to engage Torah and you start to look at the words, the coolest thing you can do is sit there and read it. You may not understand it, what you're reading, but it sounds cool and it sounds like you know what you're talking about. Okay? So remember, this is our O vowel. This is the letter Ein. Here we have an A vowel. This is a short A vowel. Now what's missing from here? The dot, the dagesh. The hardening dagesh is not there. So this is a V. It's softened. It's a V. So with the A vowel, it's a Va. So we have Ovad. So we have a dalet here, and this is our 2 dots, is what's the Shavah. So we know with the Shavah, in this instance, if the 2 dots are ever following a shortened vowel, that consonant is attached to that vowel. That's why it's Ovadyah. Ovadyah. So where are our syllables? Ovadyah. So we've got 3 syllables here. Okay? And the gematria, so every letter has a number. Let's put them up here for you. So we have 70 for iron, we have 2 for bet, we have 4 for dalet, we have 10 for yod, and we have 5 for hay. Check my maths. Does that equal 91? 70, 80, 85, 89, 91. Woo! Not quite a heretic yet. Okay, so the word Ovadyah is made up of 2 words. Okay? And the words that we have here is Ein, Bet, and Dalet make up the word Eved. Eved is the word for servant. Eved is servant. Yah is one of the names of God. Okay? So it is a servant of God. So straight away, just by looking at this name, we know what the character of this person is. So remember we talked about what is a name? What's in a name? So Ovadyah was a servant of God. It's pretty amazing if you would be called that. And so he wasn't called that for, just because his parents decided that sounded cool. That is his conversion name. Okay? Ovadyah was an Edomite. So he was a descendant of Esau. And I'll tell you something about the Edomites. The Edomites did not like their brethren Israel. Not one bit. They were always trying to wipe them out. So the Amalekites were the descendants of Edom. And we know that during the Exodus, after Passover, when they came out, what happens? The Amalekites heard that the Israelites were leaving Egypt. What was their first thought? Raise an army, attack them. And that's what happened. And there was an almighty battle, but of course they had no victory. And that's the thing about the Amalekites. So this is a very interesting situation. A descendant of Esau has now been given the name servant of God. And he gave it because he is a convert. What is a convert in Jewish law? Okay? A convert is someone who forsakes their family heritage, forsakes the religion of their land, and converts completely to follow the one true God. And takes upon themselves the full obligation to perform every mitzvah, every Torah. So Ovadyah was a convert from a nation that hated Israel. I want you to think about this. But here's another interesting thing about him. So let's go into Tanakh. And in 1 Kings 18:3 is the first time we come across Ovadyah. So who was Ovadyah? We know now that he was a convert. But what was his role? He was the housekeeper of 2 very interesting sovereigns. Okay? The king at that time, his name was Akav. Akav. Do you know who Akav was? Okay, you know him as Ahab. And what was his wife's name? Actually it was Izebel. Izebel. I think that's how you say it properly. That's very close anyway. So we translate it as Jezebel. 2 of the most wicked sovereigns, and that utterly drove the nation of Israel. So we're talking about the 10 tribes that separated from Judah. And was it Judah and Benjamin? I think it was Judah and Benjamin. We don't count the Levites in there. Okay? Judah is because the Levites weren't counted in amongst the 12 tribes. That's why you have Ephraim and Manasseh. So Ephraim and Manasseh replaced their name as part of the 12. Make sense? So the 10 tribes that separated from Judah and the Davidic house were plunged into idolatry primarily because of this man. And what was Jezebel up to? Jezebel's whole bent in life was to destroy the prophetic. In other words, she wanted to destroy the testimony of the desire of God for his people. That's the nature of the prophetic, is to testify or be a witness to what God is saying about the future of a people group. It's not fortune telling for your individual pleasure. Okay, that's not what prophecy's for. It's not what a prophet does. Prophet shouldn't be going and walking around saying, would you like to know about your future? You know, I think it's a tragedy, an absolute tragedy. Now, this is just my perspective. Take it as you will. But it's an absolute tragedy that we have these people walking around calling themselves prophets, and all they do is individual fortune telling. In Israel, to be a prophet, you had to hear the word for a nation. For the nation. Okay? Or speak directly to the king, like the prophet Nathan did with David. Did you hear me on this? Okay? So Jezebel, her whole bent in life was to destroy that. Because if she could destroy the prophetic, then she could destroy the voice of the testimony of the desire of the God for the redemption of those 10 tribes. Because the truth of their condition would no longer be blasted at them. So the prophets would turn up and they would say, you're doing this, you're doing that, stop, 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 return to God, repent, repent. Remember we talked about teshuvah? So teshuvah was what? Returning your breath to him. Return your breath to him so that he becomes the focus of your heart and your desire. What is idolatry doing? Idolatry wants to take your breath away from that so that your conversation becomes mundane. It's taking something that is familiar, like a tree or, the whatever, You can recognize it. You can talk to it. It's not challenging your intellect at all. It's dragging it down. Okay? So isn't it interesting that a man whose name was Ovadyah, servant of God, was the housekeeper for these two people? Don't you find that a little bit interesting? Can't we see that? Don't we think at the end of the day what always wins? The truth. You can't kill it. No matter how much Jezebel tried, she could not kill the truth. And this is the issue about what 8 means. The 8th day is all about the transcendence of the natural. The transcendence of the natural, so that who we are is able to come outside of creation to begin to witness the desire of God, and we become his servant because we bring the testimony of that back into creation, to bring it towards truth. I'm going to show you some stuff about this word. It's going to be very interesting. Because Ovadyah, in what they say is that Ovadyah merited prophecy because of something that he did. The way he served God. Now, a very interesting thing was happening. So we know that Jezebel was wiping out as many prophets as she could. If you read just before I bring this out, Ovadyah, as it was one of the 4 prophets who was taught directly by, I need to get this name right, Eliyahu. And Eliyahu we know as Elijah, I think that's how they say it. But Eliyahu, if you know the Hebrew words, if you look at it in its Hebrew, you start to learn what was the nature and the character of his name that was expressed in his function. I talked about this the other day. What's the purpose of a name? Function. This is not just a pretty name. This was his function. He was a servant of God, placed in the most wicked of situations But while he was there, guess what he did? Now, sorry, I was going to name the other three prophets that studied under Eliyahu. Okay, they were Jonah, Micah, Elisha, and Ovadyah. So those are the three, and him. Okay? What did he do while he was in the house of Ahab and Jezebel? He saved 100 prophets. He put them in a cave, put them in 2 caves, 50 in each cave, and then he paid for them to live. He paid for them to have water and food and light so that they would be studying Torah all the time. All the time. Remember how the Lord always says things about, I have set aside a remnant? There is always a remnant. There is, on this planet, at every given moment, there is always somebody studying Torah. Always. And because of that, it's the engagement of the thoughts, the speech, and the actions of God. We talked about this the other day. Why is Torah important? Because it is His living breath, His desire. It is the expression, the container of His heart towards us that gives us a framework to begin to engage the living nature of His desire. Because when we get His perspective, it transforms our perspective. It's not how I see, it's how He sees. And if He is beyond us, then we have to allow Him to guide us into the place where we can be expanded. So remember what we talked about here? This is our initial confrontation with revelation. So when something is revealed to you about God, it's just a speck. It's just a dot. As you engage it, as you wrestle with it, in other words, it's beyond your intellect. And if it gets past your emotions, we talked about that, remember? So there's a little bit of revision going on here. It gets through your emotions, it gets into your thought life. When it gets into your thought life, that's when who you are starts to expand. Because what's the goal? To know Him more. To know Him more, we've got to be able to perceive Him more. But to be able to perceive Him more, we have to be stretched. We have to be changed. Because what's the goal as well? To know Him more so that we can co-labor with His desire to see this brought towards completion, which is truth. Truth always wins. Doesn't matter how much you try to hide things, the truth always comes out, doesn't it? Always. Even the Torah talks about this. The Tanakh talks about this. There is nothing hidden that will not be revealed. Doesn't matter. Okay. So Ovadyah saved 100 prophets from Jezebel. Hid them in 2 caves. Gave them water. Gave them food. Gave them light so they would always be able to study Torah. Because they are underground, they're hidden. But they're always hidden in a place where there is constant light. And he did this, he borrowed money. He went beyond his means to make sure that these guys had everything they needed to do to keep working and studying, to be in the desire of God, so that whenever God's desire needed to be explained or expressed to His people, they were able to be the servants of that desire. So you know about his wife? Because Ovadyah eventually died, and he died with debt. So you know the story about a certain widow? A certain widow who cried out to Elisha, said, "Do you not remember my husband and what he did?" And then what did Elisha say? "What do you want me to do?" He says, "We have great debts. The debt collectors are coming to take my 2 sons and to take them as slaves because they cannot pay this off." And he goes, "What do you have in your house?" He says, "I have 1 jar of oil." And he says, "Right, get as many containers as you can. Not just from your house. Go out to every house around you and borrow as many containers as you can. Come back and start filling them." And they started filling them. And I haven't looked at it, but I'm sure there is a record of how much oil she actually she managed to get before she ran out of vessels. But you've got to remember, for the Jewish people, this is living history. It's living history. That's why we know that it was Ovadyah's wife, because they know. And it's all, they've got the record of there, and I haven't properly studied that side of things because I was too busy getting in awe of what was going on here. But she was able to sell enough oil to pay off her debt and then have enough to be left over to finance the rest of her life and her son's life. I want you to think about that. This is for your family will live off the rest of it for the rest of your days. So it wasn't just enough for her time, it was enough for her son's time as well. This is a huge amount of oil. You know, we're talking about pure olive oil. You know, that's what they used. They used olive oil. And olive oil is what you use to light the menorah. They didn't use candles per se. They used olive oil, and they used a sacred type of olive oil in the tabernacle in the Mishkan to light the menorah. Amazing stuff, eh? That was the merit of Ovadyah. It's because of what he did, his service of going beyond his means, even though it cost him and his family, his heart was towards the integrity of Torah, keeping it in place. Okay? He was a servant of God. We also know that there was a great famine in the land of Israel at that time because they were so much into idolatry that God had closed the heavens. Because what does he promise? In the priestly blessings or in the daily prayers that we do, he says, if you walk in my ways and all these things, then I will give you rain in its season. So when it's time for harvesting, there's plenty of rain. That's the amazing thing about Israel and the difference between Egypt and Israel. Egypt had the Nile. Israel completely relied on rain. Completely relied on rain. They didn't have irrigation ditches all over the place coming from a giant river to water their crops. It had to rain. And while they were in the ways of God, they had everything they needed. So you find the story of Ovadyah's wife in 2 Kings 4:17. And, of course, the stuff that we're just talking about now is in 1 Kings 18:3. Okay. This is 2,700 years ago. Just so let you know. Obadiah was a convert. We did that. Blah, blah, blah. Here's an interesting thing. I want to teach you something from the Talmud. So the Talmud is a collection of writings that explains the oral law of Torah. So when Moses went up the mountain and received the Ten Commandments and received the tablets, he also got the instruction on how to fulfill the law. If you go and you read it, you'll see it quite clearly. God explained to him how the law works. So when he came down, he passed on the explanation of the law orally. First he would pass it on to the high priest, on to Aaron and his sons. Then he would pass it on to the princes, the heads of the family. And then he would pass the same thing on to the rest of the people. So he was continually teaching them how to perform the law. And that's the oral law. The two work hand in hand. Yeah, but anyway, just so you would know. So the Talmud teaches a very interesting thing. If you want to cut down a tree, you use an axe, yeah? What you do is you take some wood from that tree, you attach it to metal, and then you can cut it down. Okay? And it's the same, what they teach is it's the same way that you knock down Edom. So and here's the interesting teaching from this. This is how God works, especially with converts. Okay? How does he redeem a nation? He takes people from that nation, he sanctifies them, and then he puts them back in that nation to change the nation. That's how he works. That's how his hand works in people. Okay? He takes them, he sanctifies them, he messes up their intellect by showing them truth, changes their perspective so that they have his perspective, and then shows them how to partner with him in creation because they are a servant of God. Make sense? Starting to see the picture? Okay. So what is the connection between Ovadyah and this Shmini, the 8th day? Here's the first one. If we look again at 1 Kings 18:3, it says something very interesting. So Ahab is having a conversation with him. He's calling to him and he's saying, we need to do something about this famine. All right? I need you to come and talk with me. And it says, after Ahab is calling him, it describes who Obadiah is. It says Obadiah was over his household, so he was his house keeper. And Obadiah feared God greatly. That's what it says. He was exceedingly fearing of God. So what does it say about the fear of God? It says, Rashit Chokmah Yirat Adonai, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Now we've talked about wisdom over the past few days, haven't we? What is wisdom? Wisdom is the flash. Oops. The flash of the confrontation of revelation. And that wisdom, because it comes from him, is beyond your intellect. Okay? Chokmah. It says, Chokmah tikra. Wisdom calls out. The safety of, the fear of the Lord. So that's when I said, Chokmah yirat. So wisdom, Rashit is the beginning. Rashit Chokmah, so the beginning of wisdom is the Yirat Adonai, so the fear of the Lord. Yirat. So that has a. So fear is actually a verb. I think it's third person singular, something going on. I'd have to have a quick look at the actual word to show me. What? What? Rashit, beginning. Beginning. So Barashit, in the beginning. So there's that word Rashit. So Rashit Chokmah Yirat Adonai. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And so it says there that Obadiah greatly feared the Lord. And because he greatly feared the Lord, that made him a very interesting individual. And what they say is that even Abraham was not given this title. So Obadiah greatly feared the Lord more than Abraham. Because it says of Abraham that he just feared the Lord. You'll see that where it talks about that in Genesis 22:12. I've got it written here somewhere. You guys all right? Yep. It's rather warm in here, isn't it? Or is it just me? Now here's an interesting thing about this time that we're in. So we're we're in Pesach now, but when you're usually reading this portion, it either falls after Purim or it falls after Pesach. Okay? Now here's the interesting thing. What is Purim about? You guys know the festival of Purim? So Purim is, it's not a Torah-instigated celebration, it's a rabbinical. In fact, Esther and Mordecai instituted the celebration of Purim. Okay? So it's always on the same date. It's in the month of Adar, which is before the month of Nisan. And the month of Adar is what they call the month of joy. And it's the month that gets repeated. So you have a leap month, you repeat the month Adar. Now the goal of Purim and celebration, now hear me on this, let me explain it before you get all funny about it. The idea or the goal of celebrating in Purim is to get so intoxicated that you can no longer tell the difference between the blessing of Mordecai or the curse of Haman. Did you hear what I just said? To get so intoxicated that you can't tell the difference between what is right and what is wrong. But what that actually means is that you get we so intoxicate ourselves in the mysteries of Torah that it elevates us to a place where creation no longer has any meaning to us. So in other words, Purim is about the eight. It's going outside of the natural and into the place where things in the realm of the kingdom of our Father's house, where all we know is Him. And when it's Him, it's not about good and it's not about evil. That's exactly right. So the effect on your flesh of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is detached from you, because you come into a realm of existence where that no longer has any function. Isn't that amazing? So that's what Purim is actually about. And I talked before about Pesach. What is Pesach about? Pesach is about skipping over the natural so that you can come towards the full revealing of the heart of God in fire. Isn't that interesting? Pesach is where we leap over the natural and are liberated into the fire of Hashem. Now here's the interesting thing about that, and why a servant of God is about being in that realm, but realizing that this is the actual place of our service. This is where we serve God. You don't serve God here. This is where you become one with God. Okay? Because what can happen, and this is important, sometimes we get so focused on the supernatural that we forget that we're supposed to bring it back. And this is the lesson of the letter Chet. Remember we talked about the letter Chet? So Chet is the word for Chokmah. What is the function of wisdom? Why do we learn wisdom? We learn wisdom so that we can serve Him. Because wisdom is about the wisdom of His ways. So the function of going outside of nature is that we go there to engage the supply of our Father's house to bring it back into this. That is one of the reasons why I am very passionate about the practical nature of all this. I don't want to present to you things that have no practical function for you. That's why even though I talk about being confronted by that which is beyond your intellect, what do I talk about? The goal is to wrestle with it so it becomes a living part of you. And that's the function of the letters, is to guide you into that. God has given us guides so that we can comprehend more of Him. I know that for some of you that seems a bit weird. What are you talking about, guides? All we need is God. Well, actually, God is beyond us. So what He does is, in His mercy, He gives us an array of things that we can cope with initially. That's why every one of us is important to every one of us, because every one of us carries a part of the revealing of who He is, because He's too big for one person to comprehend. The goal is oneness in Him. Together, all of us celebrating the knowledge of God and sharing the knowledge of God. So there's things about this that I won't learn because someone else is doing it. I can guarantee you, this is what excites me about this. When I started doing this, virtually nobody was talking about the living nature of these letters. But now people are. It's starting to spread, you know. And then I found out that the Jewish people have been talking about it for 3,000 years. And I was like, you could have told me sooner. But you see what I mean? See what's happening? God takes something from a people group, brings them into the reality of his desire to begin to show them his perspective so that they can come back into this to share the witness of what they've been shown. Does that make sense? And they talk about, this is what was one of the problems of why the two sons of Aaron died. So I encourage you to go and read the portion in Vayikra. It's from Leviticus 9:1 through to Leviticus 11:47. That's how big the portion is. Split over 7 days, of course. But in there we have so Nadab and Abihu. They brought alien incense before him, and fire came out from the Lord. They say that the fire came out and they breathed it in. So they breathed it in, and you know what happens when you breathe fire. That's an amazing thing. I mean, this talks about the heart of Aaron. Aaron watched his two older sons die in front of him, but because of the nature of his service to God, he was not allowed to mourn them. He had to keep doing the service. And it's just, you think about that. Think about what you would have done if you saw your two sons just die. You know, he wasn't allowed to mourn them. So what happened is the whole nation mourned for him. Aaron was an amazing man. You know, I get really upset when people talk about the high priest in a bad way. This guy was amazing. You know, when he died, all of Israel mourned for him for 30 days, the men and the women, because he was a servant of God brings peace. You know why they bring peace? Because they're in his house. And the atmosphere of his house is shalom. And so wherever he would go, he would bring peace between man and between man and wife. It's actually they talk about this as one of the things that you do in this world that gives you great merit here, but also great merit in the world to come. And that is bringing peace. So bringing peace between your fellow men and bringing peace between husband and wife. That's what Aaron would do. He's amazing. And I think we need to celebrate him more than we do. We talk about Moshe and all that. You know, he's highly venerated, but Aaron is right up there. Right up there. When Moshe died, only the men mourned him for 30 days. The women were like, well, we're busy. I'm sure it wasn't like that, but you get the sense. You get the sense of the picture. That's how much Aaron was loved. So, the aunties, yeah. They were like, now we have to pick up the slack. So that's Aharon. But they say that his two sons died because their passion and their zeal to stay in that realm, because you know what it's like. They were able to go into the tent before the veil, before the Holy of Holies. They were able to go into the Holy of Holies because that's where you took the incense. Because the incense was already burning on the golden altar. So you've got the tent of the tabernacle. You've got the first part, which holds the golden altar for burning incense. You've got the menorah, and you've got the showbread. There's the table of the showbread. Then you've got the veil. Then you've got the Holy of Holies. A place that is pitch black in there. You know, but they would go in there, and it was just amazing. I mean, just please read it. You know, go and look at what was happening and how God explains what was going on when they went in there. That between the wings of the cherubim, the realm of creation would warp as the presence of God made itself manifest between them. It's just like, you can only just imagine what that looked like. But you had to go in there swinging your incense. You fill the whole place with incense so you wouldn't die. You know, but they went in there and they died. But they went in there because they didn't want to come back. That's one of the things they talk about. There's other accounts of it, but one of the things they talk about is because they encountered the glory of his presence and they didn't want to come back. And because of that, they were no longer relevant to creation. So if all you do is focus on the spiritual realm, you're no longer relevant to creation. Yeah. Do you want to be a servant or not? And look, that's okay. If that's all you want, that's all you'll get. And that's good enough. Look, it's good. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that you won't be this. You won't be a witness of that into this. Because you won't be able, because what's here, when we talked about this the other day, see there's this overlapping circle? So there's a realm where eternity overlaps with creation. This is the realm of his house. This is the realm of the house of his perfected desire. Up here, this has no place here. The information of here cannot fit into that. Okay, and then remember we talked about beyond. What's beyond here is we don't talk about. You can't. It's impossible. We can't talk about this. All we can say is that the level of living of life here is too big for this. That's why God doesn't come into creation. He does not come into creation. What he did is he created a vessel, okay, that could house the infinite, which is you, which is his light. Okay, we talked about light. You know, I'm going to be studying that session myself because there were some things that came out in that session that were very, very new. Remember, sometimes I say I'm talking along. It sounds like I already know it, but I don't. Because remember, it's our conversation. Our conversation is what is the wrestling of our understanding. So wisdom is not knowledge. Okay, his wisdom is not our knowledge. Our wisdom stops here. On the intersecting point between creation and eternity, our wisdom stops here. His wisdom starts there. So the fullness of his wisdom does not come into creation but by you. And what he does is he reveals a tiny, tiny dot of it to you so that it can change you and bring you up to a state where you can begin to see the beginning of his wisdom. Okay? But it's the rest. Remember I talked about here is the wrestling of our understanding so that it can become knowledge. And knowledge, what is knowledge? Knowledge is the living nature of it alive in you. So when you speak with the knowledge of the living nature of it, it actually, it is changing the environment around you. Your words, your breath, changes the environment around you. So when your breath is turned to him and entwined in him, guess how much more the reality of this is changing this. Can you begin to see how important we are? Ovadyah, Ovadyah, servant of God. Whoo. So the objective of becoming high in God and spirituality is to bring that level of engagement back into the natural so that you can transform it. This is the lesson of the letter Chet. So the letter Chet talks about running and returning. The letter Chet, the number 8 signifies or alludes to the gateway into the transcendent. It's a gateway that you go in to come back out of. In to come back out. In to come back out. Makes sense? Important stuff. So we are to bring the transcendent spirituality and infusion of holiness and transform the world around us. We have to take this and bring it back into everyday life. So why does Ovadyah merit prophecy? Let me show you something very interesting about what it means to be a servant. So here's the word servant in Hebrew. I've already shown you the letters. Put our nakudos on there. So how many syllables do we have? 2 syllables. There's only 2 vowels. So remember, a syllable, however many syllables you have in a word, is by how many vowels are noted. Remember, that's not a vowel, so that doesn't indicate a syllable. So we have 2 syllables. So remember, consonant, verb, syllable. Consonant, verb, consonant. So this is an open syllable. This is a closed syllable. Okay, just to keep refreshing. So how do we say this? These are our 2 short E vowels. So evid. Evid. Yep. So this is the word for servant. Now, Remember I talked about what is a servant is brings the witness of what they see and what they engage and what they entangle with back into creation. Let me show you something very interesting about this word. If we take these two letters here and we combine them, we get the word ed. Okay? And this means witness. Ed. Yeah, so use your E vowel. It's just one syllable. Ed. Ed. And it sounds like Ed. So next time you see someone called Ed, you say, oh, you are the witness. I made you laugh. Ed. Witness. What happens to my cool little blue pen? Okay, so this is the word servant. This is the word witness. Okay, here is servant of, I'll write Yah there, because we get to use that name. Oh my goodness, look what I've done. I've created a mess. It's the unknowable. Ovadyah. Ovadyah was a servant. He was a witness. He was a witness. He was a witness of what? The bet. The house of God. He was a witness of a house. Okay? A servant can be will be the witness of whatever their house is. Now, don't you think this is ironic? Ovadyah was the housekeeper of the house of Ahab, but he was not a witness of the house of Ahab. He was a witness of the house of God. All that in a name. But wait, there's more. For $9.99, you too can get a set of steak knives. But wait now. If you pay an extra $100, you can get a second set for free. Go and see Watchmen. All currency accepted, except for Bitcoin. But isn't this really interesting? So, Ovadyah teaches us that the 8th day is about going in and coming out. It's about coming into the house of God so that we can partake of the supply of that house and be transformed and be changed so that we can have the living knowledge of it, and then we bring that back out into creation, into the... When I say creation, I'm talking about your context, your environment. So let's use that instead. You come back into your environment, and the nature of what you have witnessed, you are an eyewitness. Isn't it amazing that the letter Ein, what's the letter Ein all about? How you see. We talked about the letter Ein quite a bit. It's the skin, it's light, it's all those cool things. It's the capacity to see the revelation of Sinai. It's engaging the ladder of his name. Remember we talked about that? Coming up, returning our breath, all sitting in this. All sitting in this is the explanation of what I talked about the other day. Because you're a servant. Because your heart is turned towards his desire. Because what is it? Your breath allows you to behold what you cannot observe. Because of faith. Remember we talked about faith? See how it's all coming together? See how it forms a framework, a foundational framework for you to realize that there's more and that you have a part to play in it all. This is practical, isn't it? You know, we started out sounding this is really weird and mysterious, but the more you engage it, see, your perspective has been expanded. Just by being here and by paying attention, You're being expanded. There's still some things that you're going to wrestle with. Things that you're thinking, oh, what the heck does he mean by that? That's your wrestling. Allow yourself to wrestle with it, and just all you need to say is, Father, bring me into the truth of this. Bring me into the truth. Allow your Ruach, your breath, your Ruach HaKodesh, your Holy Spirit, to gather me up and take me into where I don't know how to go. Because the process of being taken in is your guide to the understanding of how you move back and forth. If you don't know how to go in and out, ask him to take you. And if it doesn't happen tonight, keep doing it. Keep asking. Because what will happen is the spark of the living information will capture your attention. If you focus your attention on it, it will begin to expand. Okay, so don't worry about what you don't understand. That's a good thing. It's a good thing. It means God is talking to you. Honestly, God is talking to you. If you don't understand it, it's like, okay, it's because he's inviting you deeper. We're not stuck in kindergarten, you know. It's the natural progression of life, is to learn. And it's never going to stop, okay? The day you stop learning is the day you gave up and settled for the familiar. Please don't settle for the familiar. Don't let it freak you out either. You can trust him. You can trust him because there's peace, love, and joy in it. Okay? If you want to know if something's trying to, get one over on you, does it have peace, love, and joy in it? Simple stuff. Very simple stuff. So Ovadyah, his servant. But look what's happening with this name here, Yah. Because this again is the beautiful part. This says that everything that I've just told you about is actually kosher. It's above board. It's online. Okay? I don't want to finish with a mystery. I want to finish with an affirmation. Okay? Because if you're a servant of God, the Yod speaks about the world to come, the supernatural realm. It speaks about this. But it ends with the Hey, which talks about this world. The rabbis teach this, that God created the world to come with the Yod. He created this world with the Hey. And I can prove that scripturally as well, if you'd like me to. In the verse where it says this is the generations of the heavens and the earth in the day that he created the earth and the heavens. Okay, if you look at that sentence where it says he created, I've got it in my notes somewhere, but what it actually means is he created with the Hay. Maybe another time I can get to teach you about that. But it's there. Trust me. It is there. So the servant, his heart and his desire is always turned towards the spiritual nature of God, of his Father, of God. He desires that, but he knows that his service is here as well. So he takes that and he brings it into that. In other words, he takes his experience, he climbs the ladder with his breath. Remember how desire flows? Our breath flows in desire to be connected to his breath, which brings us into the point of infinity, which is this point here. And then we bring it back down. We bring it back in. We bring the realm of his breath. We connect it into this world and the way this world breathes to reveal infinity. Isn't it beautiful? And you just want to eat it. Yummy, yummy, great stuff. Baruch Hashem, bless the name. Bless the name that gives us access to the wonders of who he is. The witness. We are his servants because we're a witness of his house. And Ovadyah greatly feared the Lord. Greatly feared the Lord. Because he knew that his responsibility, he was responsible for this. Fearing Hashem means that I am willing to die for God. Fearing him greatly means that I am willing to live for God. Ovadyah infused the world. He knew that the entire world would come to know God and serve him. And that is the nature of his prophecy. Read the book of Ovadyah. It's a testimony that all the world will come to know him. Just as Ovadyah was infused as a servant in the house of God, he testifies of his witness to the truth that all the world will be infused with the same thing. It is not for a select few. It is for all. It is the desire of God. The desire of God. So Ovadyah worked for two of the most wicked royals of Israel, yet he dedicated himself to saving the voice of the world to come, which was stored in the prophetic. In the Navim. 100 Navim. Now the letter Kuf has a gematria of 100. It is the word of holiness. Kadosh. Holy. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Holy, holy, holy. It is the testimony of our capacity to reflect his image in truth in the now. And it's interesting, if you keep reading on in was it First Kings or Second Kings? First Kings. So if you keep reading on and from 1 Kings 18:3, you'll get to the verse 18:7. And this is where Ovadyah meets Eliyahu. And Eliyahu, and this is the cool thing about this, Eliyahu is the prophet who declares the coming of Moshiach.